Today is just a short talk. My primary goal was that I wanted to, and I have to see if I can find my way of forwarding. Let's see, good, perfect. So my goal today is to talk about an idea that actually was inspired by Hark and Sarah Miller and several people who did a talk in Lisbon. But I'm going to get started. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Kimberly Wooten. I'm an archaeologist with the California Department of Transportation, and I'm in their headquarters office, the Cultural Studies Office. And I've been an archaeologist with Caltrans specifically for 25 years and a working archaeologist for the last 35. I've kind of been lurking here around at Nahara for a while. And I wanted to talk about plastics and climate change, but I'm always comfortable talking about things that feel a little bit kind of on the fringe of climate change, but I think it's an important topic. Today is just a short presentation. After that, I'm hoping to brainstorm on this idea of creating a site record that can be used to quickly capture climate change information in the field. I want to thank Sarah for letting me use this platform as kind of the safe space to discuss my ideas. Like I said, I've been thinking about these baseline ideas since the SHAs in Lisbon. It was kind of an aha moment for me when people were presenting about how they were recording, the edge of erosion, or they were recording using photogrammetry and things like that. And I think several of the people in this at Nahar right now today we're in that session. I often feel, and maybe some of you do too, like I've missed this critical opportunity in documenting climate change and plastic pollution impacts at archaeological sites and other cultural heritage resources because I just didn't see it coming soon enough, or maybe I didn't want to see it coming. But when it comes to these baselines, when I don't feel like I'm doing enough, I'm really deeply motivated by the proverb, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. I'm curious if anybody recognizes the tree here. I think all of these were removed from Washington, D.C. yesterday, or that process started. It's one of the cherry trees, pretty famous for the cherry blossom season, and it's being inundated and destroyed by sea level rise. I often see my work referred to as theoretical, and sometimes it's called playful, or if somebody doesn't know what to do with it, they call it interesting. And in many ways, it's true. I spend a lot of time thinking about archaeology, but I don't often feel like I have access as a agency archaeologist to doing actual work in the field. And that lack of access can sometimes make you creative. But rather than theoretical, I like to think about the archaeology I do as activist or advocate archaeology. And I'm hoping it pushes the boundaries a tiny bit and is also occasionally entertaining, hopefully anyways. I feel like the work I do is grounded in this strange space between real archaeology and something else. It's a place where I struggle to make archaeology feel relevant in my daily life and to my community. I ask myself often, does the work I do, does that contribute? Does it have a pragmatic value in archaeology to my community, to the public? I began making the connection between climate change, wildfire, and archaeology in 2017. I volunteered to do cremains recovery with the Alta Heritage Foundation on the Tubbs Fire. That fire impacted Napa, Sonoma, and Lake counties in California, burning a modest 36,810 acres, with over 5,000 structures burned to the ground, including many in the city of Santa Rosa, which is in the Bay Area near San Francisco, and demonstrating for Californians that wildfire is not just a rural issue, it could burn through urban communities too. And this wasn't the first time I'd been impacted by wildfires, but it was the first time that I felt the impact on archaeology in my life, or more importantly, through the cremains recoveries, the impact on the lives of the members of the communities who had lost homes, belongings, memories, and the ashes of loved ones. By 2021, the Dixie Fire was burning nearly 1 million acres in Northern California, including historic communities, pre-contact sites, historic era sites, and architectural heritage. Climate impacts to California's cultural heritage from wildfires has been absolutely devastating. So just a little patience while you follow me on this circuitous route from climate to wildfire to plastic, and then back to climate and how it intersects with archaeology. I arrived at an interest in plastic pollution, specifically microplastics, via that interest in climate change and archaeology. As if being in a wildfire zone and writing about that experience wasn't traumatic enough, in 2019, I decided to set sail on the North Atlantic looking at microplastics with a citizen science program called X Expedition. While that death-defying, vomit-inducing adventure is a story worth telling in itself, that will have to wait for another day. The pandemic began shortly after I returned home from the Azores on that trip, and delivered my first plastic paper in SHAs at Boston in 2020. And that's when I first met Sarah and was forced to become a member of HARC, which was lovely. The pandemic also meant the end of the X Expeditions Around the World program. And sailors were trapped, actually, and not trapped, because that's not quite the right word, but they were stuck in Tahiti for a while. Now I started seeing more plastics pollution in my community, and the pandemic literally generated more and new forms of plastic pollution waste. Once seen, it can't be unseen. And the interesting thing about plastic pollution waste during the pandemic was that it increased multiple times. What had been in California a growing ban against plastic bags and the use of plastic products for takeout meals, that was all dropped. So plastic bags and takeout meal products also started coming back, and that hasn't really reduced since. Excuse me. So at the end of April of 2020, I started recording the masks, gloves, and hand sanitizer bottles on a Facebook page called Pandemic Mask Project. And started seeing plastic waste being recorded by other folks too, including contemporary archaeologists Stacy Camp, Bob Muckle, and Pamela Geller. As my awareness of plastic pollution and single-use plastics and microplastics grew, I also started seeing that when we began the transition into plastics in the United States and around the world, historically, a lot of these new plastic items look like what they were replacing, such as with these Chinese spoons. On the far left is a spoon from the 1850s. And then on the far right and that spoon is porcelain. The next four spoons are porcelain, and on the far left, or far right, excuse me, I'm left and right challenged. On the far right is a plastic spoon, and it's the exact same shape as all the historic spoons. That's the point where I started to recognize that plastic was falling into this historic era category and was really meriting recordation. And at this point, I started deciding that I wanted to use the teaching of historic era plastics as a platform for talking to folks also about plastic pollution waste. And I started teaching a series of classes on historic era plastics. This is one of the images from my class. It's a detail of a celluloid beer scraper from Old Sacramento. It's actually a Rostoller's beer, to be exact. And it's in the State Park's Archaeological Collections Facility in Sacramento, California. It dates to 1910. It's celluloid, which is one of the first plant-based plastics or plant-based polymer, and has a wide range of use from about the early 1870s into the 1930s. This next image is a pair of Bakelite spectacles from the State Parks collection as well. And it was found in an excavation at the Stanford Manor in Sacramento. These aren't dissimilar from the ones Eleanor is wearing here, circa 1920s. Bakelite also has a wide date range from about 1909, 1910 into the 1950s. So when you look at it that way, plastic pollution, plastic isn't only pollution, it's not only climate change or material impacting our cultural landscapes, it's also history. I think the simplest way to see plastic waste as a climate change issue is to acknowledge that it's a fossil fuel product. In fact, it has replaced gasoline as the fastest growing fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry does not want to change your plastic use habits. It is making them billions of dollars. As Judith Ennick, president of the anti-plastic advocacy group Beyond Plastic, stated, if plastics were a country, it would be the world's 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter, beating out all but China, the United States, India, and Russia. And I'd like to give a shout out to CSAR, the SAA's Climate Change Committee, and Carol Nash and Heather Holey, the committee chairs. Their session putting archaeology to work, expanding climate and environmental studies with archaeological record that will be happening at the upcoming SAA meetings, gave me the impetus to start thinking about that baseline information that was inspired by Sarah's Hark session, and to see if it was possible to create a site record that could be used to quickly record information about climate change and plastic pollution in the field. And if you're at the SAAs next month, come see the session. For the purposes of the talk today, it's helpful to know the title of my poster session. It's Recording Baselines. I think I probably took their session title a little bit too literally, but it's called Recording Baselines, Getting Climate Change and Plastic Pollution Data into the Archaeological Record. And the abstract for that is helpful here because that's kind of what I want to really be talking about today. Archaeological site records are a tool for recordation, not only a site's cultural constituents, landscapes, features, artifacts, built environment, components, etc., but also a format for documenting any adverse impacts that we have that have occurred to these resources. What if those site records were structured not only to record the standard project development impacts, but allowed for the option for capturing baseline information specifically on climate change impacts on cultural resources? In California and across the United States, impacts from sea level rise, wildfire erosion, extreme rain events, and even plastic pollution all become increasingly recognized as adverse effects to cultural heritage. Information captured on site records would help focus professional attention on issues surrounding climate impacts and cultural heritage, and form an important baseline from which future archaeologists, heritage preservation specialists, climate scientists, environmentalists, and other researchers could build. So that's the idea behind this. I'm actually going to see if I can actually put it on the, instead of just pulling up the PDF, I just put it on the PowerPoint presentation. And this is really kind of the place where I want to start talking to people and getting some ideas on whether actually if this already exists, which will make this a very short conversation, or if this would be something that people could see themselves using in the future. It's supposed to be quick. This is a little more complex than maybe I wanted to. And I realized this is the California form. Every state has a different site record form, but this is kind of something I wanted to build from.